Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Bryce. Welcome to Cross Culture, where we engage culture with Christ by addressing culture's most pressing problems from a Christian perspective. We want to let the gospel speak to culture and within culture in order to transform culture into kingdom culture. Today, I'm excited to be talking with my friend Robert again, and we're going to be having an interesting conversation about a person in the Bible that really relates to culture today. We live in a world that is increasingly growing in selfishness. People live life for themselves. We live life to seek pleasure. We're hedonistic, and we're always seeking the next high or the next thrill. People are on a constant search for more. We live in a culture where people are constantly trying to seek ways to satisfy themselves. And a lot of times that pursuit leads us to a place of dysfunction. It leads us to a place of unsatisfaction. It leads us to a place of yearning and longing for more. I think there's a lot of people in the world today that maybe could relate to that feeling. And ultimately, there's a cost, there's a price that comes from living our life for ourselves. When we think that this life and this experience is all about us, there's a price that comes with that. And there's a person in the Bible who lived his life in a very similar way, lived his life to please himself, lived his life to just satisfy his own hunger, his own appetite, his own cravings, and it cost him dearly. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In fact, this story is found in the book of Judges, and at the end of this story, in Judges 13, it says that in Israel, the people, there was no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. See, that's our culture today. We live our life to do what is right in our own eyes. And the story that I'm talking about is the story of Samson. Samson is a character in the Bible that teaches us a lot and has a lot of relevance for our world today. And so I'm excited to be talking to my friend Robert. Robert, thank you for being back for this conversation. When you think of our culture today and you think of where Israel was in the book of Judges, where everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes, and then you think of Samson, what do you learn from that? What do you see when you see the story of Samson and its relevance for our culture today in addressing this issue, this problem of pursuing pleasure and living our life for us and doing what's right in our own eyes?
Well, I find it an amazing story, but the setting of the story is they were occupied by the Philistines, and God was frustrated with them, and it says the Philistines have occupied them for 40 years. So, you're looking for some type of rescue. You're under occupation, like, maybe the closest thing that we could possibly relate to is Nazi Germany, occupying other countries in World War II. So the people weren't happy about it. And so we see that the Israelites weren't happy about it. And so God sends an angel to a family and says, I'm going to send you a son, and you need to keep him as Nazarite, and you need to keep him from alcohol and abstaining from a lot of things to set him aside for my purpose. And so they were godly parents and did that. And then so he had superpowers. I mean, I think of him as the character Samson as a Superman without the cape, because he didn't need it, because he had God's power.
Yeah.
And a lot of the illustrations, when we look at Samson, the story of Samson looks like some big muscular character that's got super Hulk muscles.
Yeah,
So what I really think he looked normal, and it was God's power, and it's God's glory that shined through, because nobody could figure out what the power was.
He would have been an Israelite. Yeah, he's not like he's, Saul was noticeably fit for being king because he stood above the average Israelite, and he was 6 foot. So yeah, Samson's likely not some giant Hulk figure that we've kind of pictured in our minds or animated. Yeah.
And then I think he's sort of a counter to Goliath that comes later.
Yeah.
So, Goliath, the Philistines had Goliath and intimidate everybody, but yet this guy was just a normal guy that had God's blessings and power. And God said he was going to give him the power. So they raised him as a godly person. And the parents were great. I mean, like they did what they wanted to, like what they thought was right with God.
So the context of Samson is that you're describing here. Samson never was meant to turn out necessarily the way he did. Like the way that he relates to our culture because of how he lived and the womanizing and just the wildness that comes with Samson. None of that was necessarily God's plan. Like that was more of Samson's will, right? But God had a very significant purpose for Samson and to use him within the historical context of Israel being under the thumb of the Philistines. They were being really oppressed and occupied, and God sent Samson as a hero. It's interesting to think of Samson as a hero, and a lot of times as a kid, you hear of Samson almost as a hero Bible story.
I think he was.
Yeah,
because you're under oppression.
Yeah.
And so here's somebody that's, giving it to the bad guy. And so an angel announced to the mom twice, not once, but twice about his birth because they didn't know for sure that was going to happen. And so then they're like, are you sure of this? And so the angel came a second time to the wife. And that's even neat in itself. But so Samson turns around, and the first thing he does is he goes over in Philistine territory, and he sees this woman. He's like, hey, Mom, Dad, I want her. And they're like, oh, goodness, what are we going to do? Why don't you pick an Israelite woman? What are you doing? Why are you picking somebody that's the enemy?
Yeah.
Why are you harboring like with the enemy? What are you doing? And that's where the story takes off.
So it's interesting. Like, I think even the very beginning of the story of Samson, I think relates to culture today in two significant ways. One, how he picks his partner. He picks his partner with not a lot of intentionality.
No, against parental advice.
Yeah.
And then also because she looks good.
Yeah.
Why do you want to marry her?
It's just, hey,
she's good looking.
Whoa, yeah. So Samson is really, although he's purposed by God in a really big role, it starts off in the story and he doesn't seem too interested in being God's rescuing judge to run in and smash the Philistines. He wants to run in and
sleep with them
and shack up with the Philistines. He's like, hey, he's like, we could rescue Israel from the Philistines, or I could go marry a Philistine. And imagine being his parents, and they're like, wait a second, this is not the plan. So one, how he picks his partner not out of intentionality and not oriented towards God's purpose for his life, but rather just to satisfy his own lust of the eyes and against parental advice. And also, I think it's interesting that Samson is completely going against really the purpose for his life. He's kind of just doing his own thing.
He went to the enemy.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't even, so they relent and they said, okay, we're getting married. And so then they turn around and he's like, well, who are you going to have as a groomsman? Well, they find 30 Philistines to stand up with them. You know what I mean? So then they turn around, they say, he on the journey, he finds this lion and his parents are behind him. And so that's a little bit questionable. Like, what's he doing in a grape vineyard? And then he sees a lion and he just tears it in half. And I mean, like, he lays it aside there. A Nazarite's not supposed to touch anything dead. Mm-hmm. So then when he comes back through later, he sees this honey in this lion so then he turns around, he thinks he's a little bit humorous in this riddle. So he gives him a riddle at this wedding and says, you can't solve this riddle. And he knows that they can't, from the eater, something sweet. So at any rate, they turn around and have this wedding party. He says, well, if you solve this riddle, I'll give you, clothes. But, you'll give me a nice outfit. But if, you get it, I'll go get you 30 a nice outfit.
It's a fixed riddle. It's a fixed game, though. Yeah, he knows they can't win, so he's doing it to get something for himself. Yeah, which is also our culture today. It's like it's exactly who we are.
But like he's taunting with the enemy. You know what I mean? He's turning around, and those are the people that are occupying him. And so he knows he has God's special power, but a little bit it's like he's taunting, like, okay, I'm going to challenge you to an intellectual game.
Yeah.
Not just physically strength, because, like really strong and stuff, but, he's taunting them a little bit that way.
Yeah.
And so then, he turns around and the Philistines go to the future wife and they say, unless you tell us the secret, we're going to burn you, like murder him. So it's like, okay, I got to find this. So his wife turns around and cries every night and says, Samson, if you just trust me, just tell me what the riddle is.
It's so obvious. Yeah, she's trying to get it seems like it.
And so why does he weaken himself that way? Why do we weaken ourselves that way with people? As in our journey, in our spiritual walks, do we turn around and weaken ourselves to somebody because they're crying and saying, just here, he give him a foothold.
Yeah.
So at any rate, he begins to tell her the secret.
Yeah. I think it's clear that he gets annoyed with her, but also it's clear that Samson doesn't want to stop sleeping with her. So it's like, he could just say, look, I'm not compromising here. I'm not going to give you what you're asking. And yet he continues to compromise within his life. Compromises with the partner he picks, the line in the field, compromises his Nazarene vows, right? Then all the way to, you see at the wedding with how he's interacting with the Philistines, he is purposed to essentially judge the Philistines. And here he is playing with them in a sense. He's missing the point here. And then when he's pressured by his wife, he's compromising his own relationship and agreements with God, really just to kind of appease and keep at ease and keep his life comfortable. He wants the woman that he likes and looks good. He wants to continue having pleasure with her, and he doesn't want the burden and the annoyance of her nagging and complaining. And so I'll just give you what you want.
The first story, he doesn't consummate the marriage with her because he finds out that she divulged a secret to him. Like they get ready for the ceremony and stuff, and it's like, no, okay, here's the point. Tell me the riddle. And they told him the riddle. Oh, he was mad.
Yeah.
So then he turned around and marched off and went back home. Then he came back later with what he did is first he went and killed 30 Philistines and took their clothes off of them, threw the clothes to them. There's your clothes for your deal.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my, this guy's bad. I mean, we need
won,
to stop him.
We won the competition against the wrong person. It's like,
and it's like terrible. It's like, like he turned around and slayed 30 of us.
Like a tyrant now.
Why don't they just turn around and arrest him? They can't because he has super strength.
He's flexing on him, yeah.
So then they turn around and then go to the he comes back and brings a couple goats back to her, like, okay. And the father says, look, I'm sorry, I already gave them to the other people in the wedding party. She's already married. You can take the younger.
He makes a comment to him. He says to Samson, I thought you hated her.
Yeah, you went home.
I thought you hated her. And so it's like, even his in-laws weren't convinced that Samson had love and affection for his own wife, like with how he lived his life and acted. To them, it's like, you don't want her, so we gave her to the
and how would you like them as in-laws?
I don't know. Yeah, it's like my in-laws find out about the problems within my marriage and the arguments we have. And it's like, I thought you hated. We gave her away to someone else. And it's like, I would hate them too. It's like, yeah, Samson he's making more sense.
So they offer his younger sister, and he's mad. So he turns around and lights the foxes and burns all their harvest. I mean, the whole area's harvest is just burned up in flames. So it's like, man, he's number one most wanted. So he goes back, and then Judah turns around, and there's 1,000 Israelites. And so they turn around and say, okay, we're going to capture you. You're going to, like he says, as long as you swear that you won't kill me.
Well, because of the pressure of the Philistines, though. The Philistines were like, look, he's causing such a problem. We will oppress you harder if you don't give him to us. So they sacrifice. They give 1,000 men of resources. 1,000 men is a lot of men to go find one man to give him to the Philistines. Their own, the one that's raised up to beat the Philistines, to save them. They're like, hey, let's give him up because he's causing such a problem. Yeah, so...
And you see that during occupations, like in World War II history.
Yeah.
You see that where people are trying to save their own skin. And so they're not glorifying God. And so like he's sort of out there by himself. He sort of alienated the Israelites because he's compromised himself with the Philistines. The Philistines don't like him. They're just playing nice to him because they're scared of him. They want this guy out of the picture.
Like they'll kill him if they have the opportunity.
And so both sides don't really show much support. And they said, no, we'll hand you over, but we won't murder you. And so they hand him over. And then he turned around and God strengthened him and he killed 1,000 people with the jawbone, And it's like one man took on, and then he's like, after the battle, he's like, man, God, I feel like I'm going to die of thirst. So then this rock springs forth water for him.
It's interesting that Samson does something that I think is common in our world today. He seems to only cry out to God when he can't get out of a situation with his own ability or his own wittiness or strength per se. And his strength wasn't even his strength to begin with. It was God's strength. But when he can't get himself out of a situation, that's when he calls on God. God provides, and then he goes right back to just kind of like, thanks, God. Like, all right. Because God provides water for him. And then he goes on and he's like, all right, so let's go back to being a menace now. It's like, this is great. He has no...
Next thing in the story, we see him going to a prostitute.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, we can capture him tonight after he's with the prostitute.
Then
he tears the city gates out and carries them up to the hillside. I mean, like, how can somebody carry that much strength? And so, I mean, like, I think it's sort of fascinating that we see all these characters in the Bible from Genesis on, and this one's given a superpower, and we can't handle it. We have a, like if we're like, if God just gave me a superpower, I'd glorify him. Well, look at the trap he fell into. And I mean, like, it wasn't until Jesus came that was the ultimate superpower that he
handled
could turn
it perfectly.
Yes.
He's
and
God himself.
So in culture, when we have these talents, maybe it's athletics or whatever, we see society and the culture sort of worship some things and they appease them because of that special talent, but then it consumes them later. And that's what's happening to Samson. He's being consumed by the society, you know what I mean? And he's like, he knows that God's with him, and he's got the long hair, the vow of not cutting his hair as a Nazirite. So that's his secret weapon. And, the only thing that you really notice about him would be the long hair. And so then he turns around and sees this new woman, Delilah. We're told her name. And so he sees this Delilah, and so then he's going to marry her. And now she's like wanting to know his secret.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like, what's your secret? And so that's the sad part. Like every time the compromise that Samson has, and even David in the Bible, we look at his compromise.
Yeah.
So like when young people, if they knew this story, like, do they realize what compromise leads them to? I like this boy. And, if you put your eyes on him instead of God in the relationship, I think it takes 3 people for a relationship, God and whoever you're with in any relationship. And so if God's not at the forefront, it's a different relationship. But whenever we see this happening with young people, they're pursuing with their eyes the looks and everything, and they're not pursuing God. And we compromise. We'll sell ourselves short. Satan wants to dangle that in front of us. And we see it trips up a lot of people in the Bible. It trips up us, me, everything else. It's a challenge with culture.
Me too. The high cost of low living. And it reminds me of the principle of sin and what we learn about sin from history, from our own personal life and experience from this story of Samson, is that sin will take us further than we want to go. It'll keep us there longer than we want to stay, and it'll cost us more than we want to pay. And it's like Cain in the story. It's like Jacob and Esau. The story of Esau. He sells his inheritance, his birthright, as the firstborn son for a bowl of soup. And it's easy to look at that story and say, wow, look at Esau. But that's us. That's us every time we choose sin. We've talked about that before too. But Samson, I think, represents a lot of us in a lot of ways. And like you're saying, he had it all. And yet, how does he handle it? And then when you compare that to Jesus, how does Jesus handle all the power and all the authority? I'm reminded of Philippians 2 when it says, although he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God something to be taken or used for his own advantage. So he humbled himself, emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in human likeness. So Jesus, who is God, like Samson had a superpower to give him super strength. That's like if you could take a pinch of God, right? That's not even a pinch of God, but like per se, right? Jesus was God and is God. And how did he handle all of that power? He didn't abuse any of it. There was no corruption. There was no compromise. It was faithfulness. I think of Jesus' life, and it's easy to think of him on the cross and think of that image of him on the cross as the ultimate sacrifice. But Jesus' life was full of sacrifice ever before the cross. He gets to the cross, prepared for the cross, because of his life of sacrifice and unwillingness to compromise and his desire to please the Father and live his life for the purpose that it was. And I think that is so counterculture to us today, to live our life, not for our life, but for a life that we can't even necessarily see.
And Delilah, he compromised himself, and sin blinds us to our relationship with God. So he was getting blinded by her, and she said, okay, tell me this secret. And it wasn't it. Oh, if you told me the secret, she goes on and on and on till finally he reveals the secret. So then she calls in a barber, and they cut his hair off, and he's lost his power. So the scary thing about that is they turned around and just regular few men bound him, and they gouged his eyes out. Okay, so here's Simon, the most powerful person, slayed 1,000 people, and now he's lost his strength. And it says that he didn't know that God's Spirit left him. And that's scary to me as a Christian. When does God's Spirit leave me? Sometimes we don't feel God's Spirit.
Well, I think that's the beautiful thing about Jesus. Like if you look at the Old Testament, that's actually something you will see, is you'll see that the Spirit was temporary. The Spirit would temporarily fall on someone for a specific purpose. In within history, like David, he'll write in the Psalms, "Do not take your Spirit from me." Right. So in the Old Testament, it was known that the Spirit of God, if it would fall on you or if it fell on someone, it was not guaranteed that it would stay. The beautiful thing about us as Christians is that the Spirit of God doesn't fall on us for a temporary time period, but rather it lives in us. So I'm not necessarily talking about like, can you ever lose your salvation? That's a different conversation. But what I'm saying is God doesn't just
compare it to the culture here, like in the story, like we apply it, so he turned around and he became blind. Okay, so he was physically blind. Sin leads us to blindness. But then after he's blind, here's where the story changes. He can see.
He sees God.
Like if they turned around and put him in a grinding, like an animal, like an ox, turn around, and you can imagine gruesome every day getting up and grinding grain for him and then mocking him and stuff. And then
he's entertainment for them.
Yes, and then just a mockery of it. Here's a guy that slayed 1,000 Philistines. Look at him. He's blind and can't even see where he's going. He's got to be led around like an animal. And I mean, how evil to gouge out his eyes. And Delilah never loved him. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, okay, like there. So you compromised yourself with the enemy. We compromise ourselves with Satan, just like what Samson did. Samson, we can't throw stones at Samson because we're guilty of the same thing. Sin leads us not to be intimate with God. And that as a mature Christian, the intimacy with God's desired over anything like that. And I think that's what Jesus was so good in his example, to show us that he had an intimacy with God.
Yeah.
And so Samson had an intimacy with God. He gave him a special blessing and special strength, but God also turned his back on him because he was living the wrong life. He divulged the secret. Samson divulged his own secret. It wasn't God divulging it. It wasn't Satan that revealed it.
Yeah, Samson.
Samson.
And that's another thing. I mean, even in our own culture, what do we say today? Like when we do something we know we shouldn't, a common phrase, and I've heard this a lot. Well, the devil made me do it. No, it's like we did it ourselves. Like I chose sin, and because I chose sin, I am paying a cost to that. And I think Samson, is really relevant. It's easy for me to look at Samson's life and say, wow, what a terrible guy. What a womanizer, just a buffoon, just an idiot, just a guy that
compromised himself with the enemy.
Just had it all and blew it, right? But like you said, I'm Samson. I am Samson. And if you look at Hebrews, though, in the book of Hebrews, in chapter 12, he's in like what we would call the hall of faith. Absolutely. And that's challenging for me when I see that, because I see what we see in his life, and I go, that's not the picture or image of somebody that I see when I think of heaven or when I think of being in the presence of the glory of God. And
he's not a Moses or David.
Yeah, he's not a Moses or David or somebody that is like easy to just see up there hanging out with Jesus. But then I think, if I'm in heaven, I'm not someone that's easy to imagine there. Like, I'm really not. So it's, if I'm being honest with myself, it's easy to critique him and kind of slam him, but it's a lot more challenging to say, I'm Samson. And maybe his story is included in the Bible for a very specific purpose.
Absolutely.
For us to learn and understand that intimacy with God is what matters.
Everybody did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
And Samson was doing that too. So it gives us an example. When you follow your own eyes instead of God's word, we're blind. And he was blinded by the enemy.
Yeah.
And then God turned around and gave him sight while he was blinded.
Yeah.
So then the end of the story with Samson is that he turns around and he's in a big Coliseum and everything. And there's people lined up, and it says there's like 3,000 people there. And then he turns around and he says to the boy, lead me to the pillars. And he says to God, he tells him that he's sorry, and he wants give me strength one more time. You can tell that he's
reminded of his original purpose.
Yes.
I was sent to serve as judgment to the Philistines, and here I am. And now, even though I'm blind and my life is everything I didn't want it to be, my purpose is clear.
If it be your will, give me the strength.
If it's your will, give me your strength. So he returns back to this submissive state. Yeah.
And his hair had grown by then.
Yeah.
And he had the ability for the strength, because that was supposed to be his Nazirite vow, because he turned against his vows, turned against his parents. So the story's, redemption. He's redeemed. And then he turns around and he tells the boy, lead me to the pillars. And he turns around and pulls it. And then they collapse, and he slayed more Philistines than ever. So it's like, that's the part that's sort of unique. It's a little bit awkward when you read the story. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like, why did it, like, is that like a suicide bomber or something? Is that glorifying that? But it's not, because God raised him up to go against the Philistines, and the Philistines made a mockery. And they were also in the temple of the Philistines' God. And they were making a mockery of God's person that he chose. And, so it's like, I think it's no different than what, and the other podcast that Frank was doing, talking about the bear. Came up and they're making fun of the prophet. And then so they turned around and the bears got the kids.
Well, it's like, we cry when God doesn't show up to stop injustice. But then when God says, okay, I'll address injustice, sometimes we don't like that either. Like, sometimes when someone is at a really high level of evil, God might judge that with great severity. I think of like Nazi Germany. Like, to stop Nazi Germany took some pretty hefty and severe force, right? But ultimately, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for that.
But there's so much evil, and everybody band together to fight the evil.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I'm thankful that God that there was that God addressed Nazi Germany. So when there's
Samson's job was
the Philistines. Like, if you look at the historical context of where Israel's at, they're greatly oppressed by the Philistines, and so they're the real historical context here in this time is the Philistines were the big bad guys, and so It's good that God would raise someone up to address that. That means God is not going to just sit back and let the oppressed continue to be victimized. He's not okay with that. And so Samson is.
David rose up to fight the Philistines, and remember he allowed them to
Started
have
it off by
peace.
slaughtering the
Goliath.
and his
You know what I
family.
mean? So they had a big person that was big and bad there. So
Yeah.
it's like, but God tries to raise these people up. But I feel like God raises us up, and we fall short in so many ways. And so I mean, like, what would have been like if David didn't sin with Bathsheba? What would have been like if Samson didn't pursue these women? What did God really have in store for him? How did he? But God still has a way to rescue us.
Yes.
And so that's the beauty of God, that he turns around and rescues us. And Samson turned around, and I'm sure during that time he's grinding all that grain and everything else. He thought about, I'm blinded and everything else. How foolish was I with Delilah and these women led me down the wrong road. And, God, I'm not glorified you, and, your strength left me because I traded myself off. I'm my own worst enemy. And then he turns around and he sees his life. And then when they're making a mockery of him and everything, God's person, here's the Israelites God out here. Look at him. He's like an animal. And then he turns around and says, God, can you give me strength? And this is in the temple of another God, not the God. And so he brings it down on him because all the people that were the head of the Philistines and everything were all there. So God showed that his strength, and everybody knew how it happened. They knew it was Samson. So that was like a rally call to all the Israelites. See, God turned around and slayed all of them. He can lead us over victory. We just need to quit doing what's right in our own eyes.
And what I hear being said is that even if my life is not what it could have looked like or even should have looked like because of my own doing, because of my own pursuit and will, God is still able and willing to rescue me. And that's good news. Like Samson, he's about as far gone as you could imagine. And he's abandoned his entire purpose, even though what a calling to be purposed by God for such a time like that, right? And to just squander it, and who cares, to just waste it. And yet, in that moment where he's blind and he calls God, God picks up the phone. Like that is what that reveals about who God is that he is so faithful that he would save and that he would answer us even when we deserve it the least. Like, God did not have to pick up the phone for Samson in that moment, and he did. And I think of my own life, and it's like, God doesn't have to pick up the phone when I call.
But God knew his heart, and that's why he's in the faith chapter.
Yeah. And so I think it's easy for me to sometimes use the despair of situations or circumstances or things when my life's not going the way that I think it should. It's easy for me to use that as an excuse to drive myself further into sin or further away from God. And yet here we see Samson finds himself into this position, and he runs to God. And I think that's very relevant for today.
What the world offered him, the beautiful women, turned into an endless road. It wasn't the right path, and he saw that when he was blinded. That's amazing. I mean, what is it that we get blinded in our sight that we can see God? Things may be going really well for us, and then we get blinded, and then all of a sudden we can see God. And that goes back to what we talked about in suffering. So you see, like, okay, when he had all the strength that anybody, probably the most amazing strength besides Jesus Christ I know in the Bible. Okay, so he had a special power to slay 1,000 men, stuff, all that. But then he's led around like an animal. That was his own doings. And with God, he could have done anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, showing how he turned around and traded that. So God has all these blessings for us and has this plan for us. But we turn around and pursue that, oh, this looks better to me, God. I'm going to pursue that. And where does that path lead us? And that's what culture's saying. Oh, we got these appealing things for you, but they all lead to death, or blindness. And so that's what God's trying to warn us against. And that's what we can see in Samson's life. And, every day when he ground that grain for those people for however long it was. Can you imagine thinking about it? I can't see. I remember she's a beautiful woman, but, look what she did. Every woman I talked to betrayed me, but I was with the enemy. He had to think about that every time while he's grinding that. And it's like no strength, nobody rescuing him. He created his own mess, living in it.
Yeah.
A little bit like the prodigal son.
Yeah. What I learned from the book of Samson, or the story of, not the book of Samson, the story of Samson, is that true sight is not physical. Like, we don't see with our physical eyes. We actually see with our hearts. And it makes sense when Jesus says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And so it's like, how can I see God more clearly in my life? By addressing the condition of my heart. Like Proverbs 4:23, when it says, guard your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in other words, I have to have a vigilance over the condition of my heart, because whatever its condition will determine the entirety of my life. And that is, I think, what I see here in the story of Samson, is that he did not have this, he had this great calling. He was equipped for the calling, but he had no vigilance over his heart. And because of that, his life became a mess. And so I hope that if someone's watching this, I hope they go and spend time in the story of Samson. I hope they read it for themselves. I hope they see what God gave Samson, what Samson did with it, where it led him, and then how God still shows up. Because that's how we are today. Is there anything else that you would want to share with someone that maybe hasn't heard of the story of Samson or read the story of Samson, that we can learn from that?
Well, the book is very odd because, there's one story that pops out in that same book when everybody's doing what was right in their own eyes, is a woman killed a guy with a tent peg through his skull. And there's another thing, a guy goes up to a city gate and a woman throws a rock over it, and he's like, tells his sword bearer, hey, stab me real quick because I don't want it to be out that a woman killed me. So it's like, are you kidding me? So all these stories that we have show that how, terrible we can be when we look for things in our own eyes instead of through God's filter. So I think that's the main story when you're reading the book, is to realize that in Judges, there's just an awful lot of weird stories, but it's all because everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. Organization, like against culture goes chaotic when they do things right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
So I think that's the takeaway for me, is to realize, whose eyes am I looking through? And sometimes when I'm blind to my own needs, I can see God's needs.
Man, fantastic. Thank you for sitting down and having this conversation.
Oh, I love it.
This is awesome. Hopefully, if someone's watching this, hopefully they will spend time, because they'll get more from their time in the book of Judges and in the story of Samson and in the stories of the people in the Bible than they'll ever get from watching this podcast.
Absolutely.
And if you're watching this, thank you for watching this. Remember, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Most of the people that watch our videos are not subscribed to the channel, so if you can, subscribe. We engage culture with Christ from a Christian perspective. We want to let the gospel speak to culture, to transform culture into kingdom culture. And remember, life is not about fulfilling our own desires and fulfilling our own hearts. It's about knowing God and making God known. And maybe your life isn't what it should be. Maybe your life is more dysfunctional than you had hoped it would be. But the good news is God is there for you. God loves you, and he will answer the call. So reach out to him. You're not alone. You're loved. And until next time, God bless.